and welcome Dean Colvin, who's here with us, the Dean of the ILR School, which is the institutional home of the Worker Institute. And Dean Colvin is a expert on collective bargaining and dispute resolution, and also a founding faculty member of the Worker Institute, and now the Dean of our program. And so we're really thrilled with his deep support for the NLLI, and also for how he's helping navigate the crisis we're having, which Cornell is also experiencing. And so I'm just so honored and thrilled that Dean Colvin could be with us to extend a few words of welcome. And let me turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Kathleen. Really appreciate that. And it's great to see the awesome turnout for the event today. Like other institutions where now we're working remotely, ILR is open for business but online, and trying to do our programs as best we can in this new and very different format. And I really do want to do a big shout out to start off with to the team at the Worker Institute who put this together, and the people behind the scenes, tech support and otherwise, who support making these things run. I think one of the big lessons of these events is the value of people that are often unseen in our organizations, in our society, who make things run, but are more crucial than ever in the situation. We're adapting as everybody else is, and trying to do our best. And I think that's really important as we all try to contribute and face these challenges at the moment. One thing that we can do with the Worker Institute and the National Labor Leadership Initiative is provide a space where we can discuss some of the key issues that we're faced in this period of crisis. I'm a scholar of workplace conflict, and one of the things that's really struck me is that once again we're seeing the centrality of labor issues in a time of social and economic crisis. If we look back in our history, the greatest time of workplace conflict, but also workplace change, was the depths of the Great Depression in the 1930s that really set the stage for much of what happened in the rest of the 20th century and the emergence of widespread collective bargaining. I think one of the most interesting things the last couple of days for me as a scholar, seeing the events going on, is the upsurge of spontaneous labor action in workplace walkouts to protest unsafe conditions. The actions we've seen around the country, Pittsburgh and down in Georgia, and now the Instacart's action and the Whole Foods action. What's going on at the Amazon facilities, right? We're seeing this upsurge of workers expressing their voice and their concerns about their safety in the workplace. This is a significant shift, things that I think we wouldn't have imagined not that long ago. And we need to understand what's going on and think about what it means for labor and for workers and their communities. So I'm hoping that this convening will be an opportunity for you to discuss these issues, to think about what they mean for your organizations, your communities, and what it means for the labor movement going forward. So thanks for joining us, and I'm looking forward to a really great conversation over the next couple of hours.
Thank you. And we know that you will be here at least maybe for part of the rest of the
Yes.
call. So if you find yourself in a small group with Dean Colvin, lucky you, you'll get a chance to get to know him better. We're actually going to kick things off with a one-on-one conversation. And so in a moment, you'll be put into a randomly generated breakout group with one other person. So hopefully you'll get to meet folks from other parts of the NLLI community that you don't know, but perhaps it'll be someone that you do know. You'll have 4 minutes in your small group, and what we're asking you to do is, again, a very time-honored NLLI process, which is for each of you to talk for about 2 minutes, and in that time to introduce yourself, but also to share anything you want to say about how you are experiencing this moment.
Hey, we were not done yet. Take us back. I was just talking. I was just getting started. Yes.
Okay, you guys, I'm muting you all because we're moving to the next thing. So Al, I'm going to mute everyone, and then Allison, can you unmute Al so he can?
Hi, everybody. It's wonderful seeing all your beautiful faces, and if not your face, even your beautiful names. So in NLLI, we talk about leadership being defined as making the right things happen that would not otherwise happen. I know some of you have that tattooed someplace on your body, but and we talk about leadership not being a title. We say it's not a noun, it's a verb. And then we get to spend 3 weeks together focusing on personal leadership in week 1, leading organizational change in week 2, and then movement building. And then right now, each of those domains of your leadership is being stretched to the limit. And each of you are in really a kind of brutal new normal, working day and night for your members and for our movement. So personally, how are you leading and coping? Are you broadening your circle, or is it shrinking? Are you listening to that wider circle? Are you lifting up new leaders, people who are well suited for this moment or new roles? And are you leading from an updated, revitalized vision, one that responds to immediate needs, but also educates and leads your members towards systemic change? And then within your organization, with your staff and leaders, have you been able to be kind and flexible as our folks struggle with loss and fear? And are there systems and traditions that need to be lifted up? And are there systems and traditions that this crisis will allow you to finally move beyond? And then finally, if this is not a movement building moment, you all should get your money back from week 3. This pandemic hits us in 3 primary ways. First, it causes physical and psychological harm. Second, it causes economic suffering and insecurity. And third, it denies us certain rights. And as unique as this moment feels, it is unique not because no one has experienced these 3 forms of suffering before. It's because all of us have not experienced this before. Think about our history. In 1850, 1 out of 7 of us were slaves and suffered those 3 forms of abuse. At the end of that same decade, some of my relatives in Ireland were in the potato famine, where 1 million people died, 1 out of every 8. And that was a few miles from the wealthiest economic power in the world. And right now, 1 out of 4 women in the United States experience gender-based violence. And right now, a woman's right to control her own body, that right is slipping away. We have 11 million immigrants living in the shadows, suffering physical and economic harm with no rights. So we have a kind of polarity here. Some aspects of this moment are unique, and some aspects of what we're experiencing have long been inflicted on a majority of Americans and workers worldwide for centuries. So what is unique is that this is affecting all of us all at once. And as always, some folks, like my nurse daughter, are going to bear a greater share of the sacrifice. But the entire world is being affected, and in that terrifying breadth is a unique opportunity. We're seeing the shaky and shady underpinnings of our economic system more exposed than ever. We're seeing a true lack of a safety net exposed. We're seeing the lack of livable, much less middle-class incomes exposed. And you know, this is really the second $1 trillion bailout in just 3 years. You know, Trump effectively gave the first couple trillion in tax breaks to the wealthy. Now we finally see that sometimes, with enough political pressure, we cannot afford not to have a just transition. So we glibly found the resources for corporate tax breaks, and we now are finding the resources for this virus. What is fair is also now what is clearly fundable, and workers are demanding fairness. We like to say in NLLI, movements make the impossible probable, perhaps even inevitable. This is both an horrific tsunami and a wave of political awakening. Workers are seeing who the heroes really are. They are seeing the limits of cowboy capitalism and individualism and racist blaming of the other. The question and the heavy, heavy challenge is, as this pandemic peaks and subsides, are leaders ready to define and seize this moment and make the right things happen that would not otherwise happen? We're so blessed on this call to have 100 amazing leaders bonded by our shared experiences of NLLI. And we're going to hear now from some of those incredible leaders. And let's use this beloved community we've created to fight forward together. So I'm going to turn it over to my leader, shawnabader-blau, the Executive Director of the Global Solidarity Center.
Thanks, Alan. I noticed that I don't touch my face unless I'm on a Zoom call. And then I try, anyway. You know, the Solidarity Center works around the world, as you know, across 60 countries with 250 staff. And, you know all the stats, 800,000 people infected globally, 40,000 deaths. These are undercounted numbers. So for our staff on the ground around the world, we were seeing immediately what you don't see in the news. In Honduras, workers had to go on strike in garment factories for the right to social distance. Sri Lankan unions are distributing dry rations to informal economy workers, poor workers helping even poorer workers survive. Unions across Asia and Africa are taking the role of public health authorities, providing basic COVID-19 education to workers, and even doing things in a place like Ethiopia, like building isolation and treatment centers for workers, since the government's not doing enough. There's a complete meltdown in respect for and enforcement of fundamental rights. Employers are using the pandemic right now to union bust the arrogance. Huge gains that workers have made in a place like Morocco. 85% of unionized garment factories are closed newly because of this crisis, adding to the hundreds and hundreds of thousands and later millions that will be facing similar crisis of layoffs. And unions across North Africa have been asking workers who can to donate salaries to other workers to survive because there's no social safety net. So the gross incompetence of our officials around the world is in stark relief to our staff. And so we were experiencing things like this all over the world, but in the midst of all this, we started to hear from our Asia teams a lot more worry and concern, back in February about the spread of the virus and a demand for the Solidarity Center to think differently about how we were managing. And I recognized it personally, as existential for us, for the people we work with and stand up for me and for our organization. And that, I made the decision individually to drop other stuff, pretty much everything else, to help figure out how to support our team and manage through this crisis. Been building teams of managers that are co-creating policies. We did all the early things 3 weeks ago, like move to global telework, suspended international travel. We have given everyone pretty much complete flexibility in terms of work schedules and work hours. We did the easy stuff, but the hard stuff is now. I look at, for myself, I get frustrated a lot in this moment. We issue new policies and people question them. I have to find it inside myself to not react, to really think about what people are going through. One of the big things, like sort of challenges for me, has been to really lean into the humanity of this moment. People experience change in so many different ways and transition in so many different ways. And this is also a change and a transition, not just moving to telework, but having to deal with this terrifying crisis and yet being asked to also work. It's extremely hard. And so for me, when I feel frustrated, I get irritated, my challenge has been to lean into my humanity and not those feelings, to delete those emails, to ask more questions of staff and get more information rather than make judgments and be frustrated. And I find that to be really important right now because people are scared. People are working from home with kids, productivity is down. And for people who are mission driven, having a lower productivity is really painful and hard. It makes people feel destabilized and insecure. And so for those of us in the position to maintain teams and employment, we're lucky. And that's rare now with the massive amount of layoffs our partners and workers are experiencing. And so we need to be responsible, stick together as teams, and lean into our true humanity. We've been doing internally, we've been giving new leaders a chance to stand up and lead on the program side, on risk management teams, let other managers lead new things they've never tried before. We've stepped up internally to create opportunities for staff to connect through this crisis and share learnings from our partners and workers around the world about what's happening in COVID-19. We call this internally the Solidarity Center School. So overall, I feel like this moment is really for us to lean into our humanity, to lead with love, to have the highest expectations, to live our mission, but to understand that some of the busy work is just not going to get done, and that's going to be okay. Because right now, more important than anything else is remembering who we are and why we exist. And why we exist, as Al said, is for this moment. What is the new social contract we're going to demand right now? We have no healthcare around the world. The workers are connected intrinsically more than, and we can see that more than ever before. Our health security globally needs to be more interconnected. We need to stand together. So what are we going to do to remake a new social contract coming out of this crisis with workers in the lead? And when governments are failing us and people don't trust in institutions, unions are an institution in many countries that workers and people and citizens can rely on and trust. So that's an opportunity for us right now. So thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit about how the Solidarity Center is experiencing this moment.
Thank you, Shauna, so much. It's Kim Cook. Some of you know me. I'm from the Cornell Worker Institute and a long-term SEIU leader. Shauna, that was so amazing to hear you kick us off with sort of both passion and global view. And I'm sure you could hear all of us sort of clapping in the background for your inspiration. Thanks. So I'm going to try to, and we don't have time now for questions. Feel free to write things in the chat room. We are going to go into small groups in a few minutes after you hear from some additional leaders. So we're going to move forward, and I'm going to try to facilitate this next section on sort of what's happening at the local level. We are going to hear from three really extraordinary local leaders about their experience. It'll be Vincent Alvarez from the New York City CLC, Montserrat Garibay from the Texas AFL-CIO, and April Sims from the Washington State Labor Council. And I hope you guys are all on here somewhere. I know all three of you have amazing stories to tell that we want to hear, although we, of course, have asked them all to just speak for 5 minutes about sort of the challenges that they're facing as leaders in this moment. And again, Kathleen will give you all a 1-minute warning. After each of them speaks, we'll go into a small group discussion. So hang on to your questions and thoughts about that, okay? So let's start with Vincent Alvarez. Vinny, can you unmute yourself? And
I am unmuted if you can hear me.
There you go, thanks.
Hey, Kim, thanks, appreciate it. All right, well, it's great to talk to everybody and see everybody as well. And hopefully we can get through this briefly, but also hopefully, my dogs don't get in an all-out war that they've been on some of these Zoom meetings at times, which is pretty interesting when that happens. So let me just talk about the crisis in New York City. You know, it's certainly been very challenging, I think, as a leader on many levels, and I'll speak to a few of those very broadly and very briefly to stay on time here. New York City, as everybody knows, has been hard hit. In the earliest days of this crisis, though, which really began for us, I would say, at a very high level of activity about 3 weeks ago, and throughout it, meaning the team at the Central Labor Council, really made a conscious effort to keep the CLC, make sure that we are keeping the CLC open for business. Different, remotely working, but make sure we are open for business and we are communicating with all of our stakeholders throughout the city in various levels, while much of the city is shutting down. And additionally, internally with the CLC, we begin each day with the full staff, with our full staff at the Central Labor Council, both the administrative staff and the programmatic staff, with Zoom meetings. A lot of us have never done that before, but we're certainly doing them now. And we do that to kind of just to begin to get our day going as a staff, as we would normally do if we were together, and to see each other visibly. And, you know, as a leader also, just to make sure everybody is connected and everybody is okay on our team. I felt it was important for us to visibly connect on a daily basis. So let's just talk for a couple quick minutes about some of the challenges, maybe 3 challenges and contradictions, if you will. I'll try to explain that about what we're dealing with. So this crisis, we have this paradox of needing to bring people together and to fashion a collective response and solutions to this crisis, both the health crisis and the economic crisis that it is causing as well. But at the same time, the requirements of social distancing, of physically being apart, how do we deal with that? That is a real paradox and a problem for those of us, because our general inclination in practice for years has always been just to come together. How do we deal with the separation and the detachment when it is required that we as workers, as leaders, as folks in community, as family members, how we're isolated? We're sometimes quarantined in many cases. So that's been a real challenge and a paradox. We are doing things like weekly executive board check-ins, which we've never done before. Every Monday morning, we've done our delegates meetings remotely, as well as all of our staff and team meetings, political directives, communications meetings, meetings with coalition partners. So that's dealing with the paradox of needing to bring people together while we're separate. Second tension that I would say really exists is this between unions and members doing their work, and this is what we're seeing, and some of which is clearly essential, and taking care of the members' health and their safety, and dealing with that in a very, very real way. We have had, I know John Samuelsen is on the call with us, and he's lost several members, and we have lost not only in the 5 boroughs of New York City, 900 people, and we're losing people at a rate of about 250 to 300 people a day now. But we've lost a lot of union members as well in the process, from first responders to people who are just on the first lines, grocery workers. So education unions have had to deal with this. Construction workers are dealing with this. Public employees, and of course, our people on the front lines. The last thing I would say is the contradiction between addressing the immediate short-term demands of this crisis that we're dealing with and trying to think creatively about the longer-term implications and the opportunities also that are going to be born of this crisis that we're going to have to deal with. And I'll just say, obviously these are very broad things, but I would say that we've all seen some profound changes over the past decade or so, how we shop, how we work, how we travel. And in my opinion, that this pandemic and economic crisis are really likely to accelerate that trend. And perhaps once work at home practices are established, many will stick. And that's going to have profound consequences, I think, for the labor movement in society.
Thanks, Vinny. Great timing. Good job. Montserrat, we'd like for you to jump in. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, everyone. Buenas tardes. Montserrat Garibay. Well, here in Austin, it all really started with the cancellation of the South by Southwest. And the majority of our IATSE members lost their job. And we have been in contact with many of them, but the one person that comes to my mind is Paul. He's a stagehand technician, and he lost his job. He went from having a full-time job doing all these different gigs for South by Southwest to nothing. He literally got paid 4 hours, and then he was let go. And right now he had to move back to his parents in Waco, and he's really extremely devastated, and he feels very hopeless. Luckily, he was able to file for the unemployment insurance benefits, which is something that the Texas AFL-CIO really worked hard. And we actually sent a letter to the governor and also the Texas Workforce Commission to waive the waiting periods to work search requirements for Texans who lost their job with the coronavirus. And we were actually successful in doing that. So that was exciting, and it gave, I think, a little bit of hope to many of the people that have lost their jobs. But of course, the battle doesn't end there. We are trying to integrate the 21st century skills into this new way of organizing to a certain degree, utilizing Zoom and all this stuff. And it's a working process for many of our affiliates, and we're serving them and helping them in how to do that. I think the big fact or the big thing that really it's happening with a lot of our affiliates is that they're not receiving the proper mask and gloves and where to do their job safely. You know, we have the nurses, the grocery workers, the people that clean, the firefighters, the social workers, and they really are the first line workers, right? And I feel like we feel at the Texas AFL-CIO that we are really getting those stories out there as this, because our work as the state federation is to uplift their work and also serve them. And you know, last night we found out that the city of Dallas was set to start enforcing the local paid sick leave policy that we work really hard with a bunch of different unions and allies. And there was an injunction by a federal judge, and for now it's going to be stopped. So of course that's totally outrageous, especially because we're in the middle of this pandemic. But as you can imagine, we're pissed as hell, and we're ready to fight back, and that's exactly what we're going to be doing. And also, I think one of the things that we're really doing is making sure that everyone fills out their census. And this is a good time to do that because people are at home, and we're looking at different ways to do that with APALA's help. We have an intern, and we're really just kind of doing these broad masses to educate people about the importance of the census, because Texas can potentially win 3 to 4 districts. So, you know, we're trying to do a lot, but we're sad as hell, but also mad as hell. And the labor movement is here to stay. Thank you.
Thanks, Montserrat. Really appreciate it. And April Sims from Washington State. April, you're on, right?
Yes.
Great. Hi, April.
Hi, good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are zooming in from. April Sims, she, her pronouns. Thank you for giving me a couple of minutes on the agenda this morning to talk a little bit about what's happening in Washington State. Just to refresh folks' memory, you know, we saw the first COVID-related death on February 19th in Kirkland, just right outside of Seattle. And it was on February 28th that we learned that some of our firefighters and first responders were potentially exposed to the virus. And we realized then that we needed to make a concerted effort to make sure that workers were centered in the conversation around the coronavirus, recognizing that we had so many frontline workers and not just first responders, right? But folks that are in transportation and retail and the service industry, and knowing that many of these workers on the front line were women and people of color and immigrants and refugees, and thinking about what we could do and what we should do to protect the most vulnerable communities. You know, I know that throughout history, disease outbreaks have shaped our politics. They've altered our societies. They've entrenched racial and economic disparities. And what we're learning about COVID-19 is that this is certainly no different. You know, we've seen its impact on the marketplace, on the global supply chain, but we've also really seen firsthand its impact on workers, families, and communities, housing, childcare, education, transportation, healthcare, and agriculture, and so many other industries. So we've really been thinking at the Washington State Labor Council about what is really required of our leadership in this moment. And we have so many affiliates that have to be directly responsive to their members. They're overwhelmed with all of the changing landscape and how rapidly things are changing. And we have a little bit of a privilege at the State Labor Council in that we don't have direct members, but so that frees us up to think a little more proactively about our work and what we need to do. So we've identified 4 key priorities here at the State Labor Council. The first is to protect frontline workers. That includes fighting for hazard pay, making sure that exposed workers have access to our workers' comp system, directly assisting in drives for PPE, but also, you know, as the first priority, and the second priority is to secure economic relief for impacted workers, and that's all workers, especially those who are being left behind by the traditional remedies that are afforded by the state and federal government. So you know, expanding unemployment so that folks can waive the waiting week, removing the requirement that they do job searches during this time, funding for our C3, which is the Foundation for Working Families, so that we can provide economic relief for immigrant communities who don't have access to unemployment benefits either through the state or federally. And the moratorium on evictions and utility disconnections. So securing that economic relief is also a huge priority. And I think those two priorities are in a reactive space. How are we protecting workers? How are we securing economic relief? But our other two priorities are more in a proactive space. The first is, you know, how are we institutionalizing the short-term gains that we're making? We have a great productive, I wouldn't say great, we have a healthy relationship with our governor here, and have worked very closely with him to secure some of these gains around paid sick leave. But what can we do to permanently enforce and strengthen the safety net? How do we take what we know is possible for workers and make sure that we're institutionalizing that? And then the last priority is really how are we protecting our institutions, both our union institutions, like what are we thinking long-term about organizing and what the landscape will look like moving forward, but also how are we protecting our other institutions like our pension programs, the NLRB, which is canceled elections right now, Social Security, the post office, all of these other institutions that are at risk. And so I think the challenge for us is managing the tension between being reactive, which is what this moment requires, and being proactive, which is what this moment requires of our leadership. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Vinny, April, Montserrat. We really appreciate you guys leading us off in this conversation about our leadership, right, and the challenges that we're facing. So now we're going to, actually before we do that, I just have to say it's not only awesome to see all of you, but it's awesome to see some babies out there. Smiley, Alvina, thank you for bringing those babies. Everybody else get yours. Bring them on. We're going to take a sort of a NLLI fashion now. We're going to go into breakout rooms, so you'll get a chance to reflect on what you've just heard and share your own experience with a couple of other people. And in those groups, we're going to give you 15 minutes to talk with each other, and there's no facilitator, so be sure everybody gets a chance to share, okay? And the two questions we'd like you to talk about in those groups are what has been the most challenging aspect of this crisis for your leadership, and where do you see the opportunities for change, breakthroughs within your own organization or in the broader political and economic landscape. So challenges and opportunities. I know that frame sounds familiar. So Allison, go ahead and send us to our small groups. And we don't have time to hear from all the groups, so what we did was I asked a few people to be prepared to report out really quickly on sort of what happened in your groups. So let me start with Jennifer Beuthin from the Best NLLI group, NLLI 4.
NLLI 4.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. I guess I first wanted to just comment on the incredible diversity of our group. We had folks from New York, from Morocco, from the labor movement, from faith communities. And so just hearing and seeing from everybody was incredible. And then, you know, also heartbreaking. We are probably going to hear a little bit more about it later, but, you know, dealing with workers who have just died or grappling with massive layoffs and how you support those workers. And it felt a little bit like everybody is, you know, really bombarded right now with needing to react to the moment, to the current moment. And I also think that what was so uplifting and inspiring about our group discussion was that still everybody talked about the opportunity in the moment, the fact that people are looking to unions right now. We heard a story about membership growing and people looking to unions, and also an opportunity for us to sort of redefine what the labor movement stands for in a way that we never really have been in recent memory. And then finally, also needing to be nimble in this moment. And then finally, we kind of ended our conversation around hope and this idea that in the labor and faith communities, when shit hits the fan, people come together. We come together, we look out for one another, and we recognize the humanity in the moment. And so it's through that we're going to be able to get through this. It felt really good to talk with everybody.
Thanks, Jen. I'd like to ask Alvina, with that beautiful little baby. Oh, there you are. Hi.
Hi. Yeah, in our small breakout group, a lot of really similar things to what Jennifer was reporting. We also heard about how internationally, how some of countries are not going to be able to step up and care for their citizens the same way that we are in terms of paid sick leave and unemployment benefits or stipends the way that our government has been able to, as much as that rollout has been problematic. And concerns over long-term impacts to some governments, long-term impacts to the labor movement. Collectively, I think I heard a lot of guilt and pressure in our group about how we need to step up, and same thing, the overwhelming sense of just all of the work that needs to be done right now. I talked a bit about how, as an Asian American, just the anxiety of discrimination and fear, and how some of my friends have been facing incidences just walking out, with their kids and having people scream racist things at them. And that's definitely been a concern too, like how, as a labor movement, we can protect Asian American communities and workers. But Lily ended it on a really great note, talking about how it is overwhelming, but we're not overwhelmed, and we can just take it one step at a time as a movement and be there with each other and just have some clarity and be able to do that together.
Thank you, Alvina. That was Alvina Ye. She's from NLLI 5, if I got it right? Okay.
The best NLLI class.
Yeah, of course. Katura, I've asked you to report. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here representing NLLI 6 and all of those who were a part of the group. And I do want to say, just even within the group, having the diversity was extremely helpful. And it reminds us that, we're building solidarity across ethnic lines, across racial lines, across cultural lines, across international lines. I mean, it was just great to have a good mix. So thank you for that. The anxieties that exist, right, are some of the challenges, and how do we be attentive to the anxieties that folks have around the fear of the unknown, anxieties folks have around showing up for work without having proper protective equipment, regardless of what that work may be. It's not, we hear a lot about the lack of PPEs as it relates to the medical field, but there are folks who are doing day-to-day jobs and don't have the equipment that they need, or, and I think one of the speakers talked about it earlier. I think maybe Shauna mentioned it about the inability to actually practice social distancing because of the work. And really kind of coming to a shared understanding from labor's perspective about what the challenge is, understanding what those challenges are, and our approach to it. And yet, again, with these challenges, we have the opportunity to actually look at some opportunities. Where can there be some light, some ribbon of hope, if you will. And some of this is just really showing how the union can play a different role, how the union can step up, recognizing that some folks don't have the basic needs. How can we, as an institution, as a movement, as an organization, really be supportive to our members who, have paid dues and who've kind of invested in us structurally. Having funds in place, kind of recognizing that some pre-planning that took place was very instrumental, and then capacity building, right? This is an opportunity. Are we organizing differently? Yes, that's for sure. But yet there's still an opportunity to organize and really help build the capacity of our organizations through shared communication, strategic communication, if you will, and other venues.
Thank you, Keturah. And finally, I asked Nicole Korkolis from NLLI 5 as well. If you would, there you are. Hi, Nicole.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I was in the same group as Alvina. So she's kind of reported on everything, but I'll just say it was, you know, everybody's feeling the same things, this sort of anxiety and pressure personally, but you know, the added responsibility that we have to our members is kind of another layer that a lot of people don't have that those of us in the labor movement do. But as every time I meet with NLLI people, I'm encouraged, and I felt just from our little 15-minute conversation, I feel bolstered that everyone here is up for that challenge and is certainly working hard to meet that challenge. So it's always encouraging.
Thank you. And it shows how the small group distribution doesn't always work perfectly, but I'm glad you guys feel good. Well, thank you guys. I hope you all felt like that was useful. We'd love to hear how these small groups worked in this kind of a forum for you in the long run, and whether it's something as we continue to do this that makes sense to do. So thanks for participating and doing that. Feel free to keep adding to the chat room there, that with each, we can share ideas with each other in the chat room, and we'll save those. We're gonna move on to the next part of the convening, and so I'm gonna hand this over to Jeff Grabelsky.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you all. It is so moving and inspiring to see you all. I really appreciate it. And to Vinny and Montserrat and April and Shauna for amazing brief presentations that framed where we're going. I know most of you. I'm Jeff Grabelsky. I'm on the Cornell Worker Institute team, and I'm one of the co-founders and co-directors of the National Labor Leadership Initiative, and I'm delighted to be with you. I'm based here in New York City, and I'm going to be moderating the next part of our program. So let me tell you a little bit about what we're going to be doing now. We have 4 great leaders, all NLLI alums and dear friends, who will make very brief 5-minute presentations to frame the conversation we're going to have following the pretty remarkable models of the previous presentations that were powerful and succinct. First, we have the national presidents from 3 important unions. First will be John Samuelsen, who is the president of TWU, who represents workers in the vital sector of transportation. And as you can imagine, his members are at work and dealing with the contradiction that Vinny talked about between doing the work that needs to be done that's vitally important and then also protecting the safety and health of those workers. They're still moving, you know, transportation in New York City, and John mentioned in Philadelphia, you got some major struggles going on around that issue. So John will be first, and he'll be followed by Rich Lanigan, who's the president of OPEIU, who's in the process of managing his union through this crisis, keeping people connected, while his members continue to serve their constituents, including nurses who are on the front lines. And he'll talk a little bit about the challenges that they're facing. And then finally, we have Lily Eskelsen Garcia, who's the president of the National Education Association, who leads a union whose members are at the center of, you know, one of the most disruptive aspects of this crisis, and that is, you know, shutting down our educational system and having millions and millions of kids who are now homebound. And well, I know a lot of parents I've talked with who have a deeper appreciation for teachers today than they did just a month ago. And Lily will talk about some of the work that they're doing in addressing the needs of that sector and their members. And then after that, Erica Smiley, who is the Executive Director of Jobs with Justice, will share with us some reflections about a path forward out of this crisis and how we can find hope and opportunity as we go forward. So we're going to have these very brief presentations, and then we're going to open it up for a full group discussion where you'll have an opportunity to raise questions, make comments through the chat room, and we'll do our very best to manage the conversation to get as much participation as possible. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to John Samuelsen from TWU.
All right, well, just I had to smile at your comment about millions of American kids being taught at home now, because I've been homeschooling my kids for the last 12 years. Really, my wife has been doing it, so it's more disruptive for them to have me home every day because I'm working out of home. So it's the opposite way around for them. So at any rate, we have a lot going on, obviously, right? And just a couple of the comments from earlier speakers, either in the groups or otherwise. We find ourselves trying to run a union, trying to lead a union, trying to show national leadership, and simultaneously dealing with the emotion of having members dead, as if they were run down by trains, or if they were electrocuted by the third rail, which happens to us. But now we have 7 unanswered deaths, really, against a line of duty deaths against an unseen enemy. You know, it's very difficult to wrap our brains around. And so in the midst of dealing with this, we are fighting back and in the weeds in many ways, trying to run the day-to-day affairs of a 150,000 member national union, not the biggest union out there, but nonetheless, so it's every day is a fight. Right now, as I said before, I think before we got on the call, perhaps, that we'll be running very likely job actions all day in Philadelphia right now over lack of PPE and over lack of decontamination of train cars and buses. So as I'm sitting here talking to you, I just got a text that they're threatening to take 1,000 TW members out of service in Philadelphia, which if they do that, we'll be on strike tomorrow morning, because we will strike the SEPTA system in Philadelphia if they take our people out of service over refusing to work in a totally exposed environment. So the same thing goes on in Houston, San Francisco, Miami, to varying degrees. As we all have heard, the epicenter of the fight is in New York City. So we have 40,000 New York City bus and subway workers that have really been in a incredible struggle for the last 2 weeks over things that are pretty simple, things that seem like common sense, over masks and gloves. And similar to Philadelphia, we had to threaten what amounts to actions, industrial action in the New York City subway and bus system in order to get them to supply masks. That was about 4 days ago. But even just as 2 weeks ago seems like the world ago to me. 2 weeks ago things have changed so much in 2 weeks. It seems like 6 months ago. 2 weeks ago, the fight was whether or not masks were even appropriate. And we won that fight. The New York City Transit Authority threatened to take us out of service for wearing our own masks. We steamrolled right over them. And it's just now 2 weeks later that they're issuing masks. So I just a lot of different, obviously I don't have any prepared remarks, so I'm just speaking off the top of my head. So I'm trying to balance out representing workers, first of all, coming off what was really an amazing collective effort by the trade union movement to shape the stimulus package that came, a stimulus package that in many ways supports workers rather than corporations in many ways, or at least there are protections for workers, particularly in our industry. And in one of the breakout calls, somebody said that, I think Pat White actually said that there's two different problems here that we have. One is we're collectively potentially in an industry where everybody's out of work. And when everybody's out of work, there's an economic problem, but there's not an exposure problem. Likely not an exposure problem, but in the transportation industry, almost everybody's working. We have only about 150 furloughs out of 150,000 members. And the problem with that is we're all flush with cash, making plenty of overtime, plenty of money, but everybody's exposed to harm's way. So the problem seemed to be either it's a massive economic problem, or if it's a massive health and safety problem. And again, that's what we're battling against every day. So I do continue to find myself 2 years later trying to figure out what the relationship is between an international union and the 104 locals that we represent. I came into NLLI as a local president. I was running the big local in New York City, Local 100, which is about 45,000 members. And I made that transition over to the international. I'm still working on that 2 years later. And this is really bringing some clarity to the relationship between the locals and the international. And I'm pretty much convinced now that I'm going to run the international forevermore like it's one big local, because that's what I find to be necessary. Other things, we're struggling to keep our organizing going. We have a outsized organizing effort going on in California right now among rideshare drivers. This has presented an opportunity for us to actually shine as organized labor and demonstrate to rideshare drivers in California, where we're organizing, that the importance of the trade union movement. The same holds true in the airline industry. Non-union airline workers right now are getting pummeled, and they're looking to the trade union movement as the protector, as their collective protection. So I believe, just in terms of opportunities, when this calamity is done, that the organizing in the transport sector will be off the charts. And similarly, in the aftermath of Occupy Wall Street, where organizing took off in the transport sector, and also after the Bernie primary run in 2016, where the organizing opportunities became immense. So I think there are some opportunities in the midst of this pandemic, this calamity. I guess that's about it. I'm out of time. I don't want to sound like Joe Biden and say, am I out of time? I'm done.
No, that's great, John. Thank you so much. And there will be opportunity for you to explore some of those the opportunities in this moment in our discussion. So we really appreciate that that presentation. And then we're going to shift. Thank you, John, to Rich Lanigan. And Rich, are you on the line? And can you hear me? And can we see you?
Thank you very much for getting this group together. I know everyone is trying to understand and appreciate the point in time we are in and what effect it's going to have on our organization short term and long term, and for the politics of the country long term. When I first sat down to think about comments about this, I thought to myself, what were the other major existential moments in the last few years or the latter part of my career? And I thought about 9/11, and I thought about Janus. 9/11 and its effect on the whole country, and Janus and its effect on the labor movement. 9/11, caused people to change careers, join the military, do things they never would have done. It caused change that wouldn't have happened but for that event. Janus did the same thing for the labor movement, in that millions of people were mobilized, engaged, unions started whole new divisions, and new member orientation and internal organizing became everyday household words, public sector and private sector. At this moment, our union is facing a similar test. And I think we have to look at our capacity as we did in Janus, and as we attempt to do all of what we do to service people and deliver best practices and information. And what we found is that when we mobilized for Janus, we engaged about 30% of the union, and all of that infrastructure is very well fortified. But the private sector aspect of the union really we've seen now has to be built up, particularly with respect to our ability to communicate with our smaller locals. We don't have contact information. We have people who've made this a major part of their work, our secretary treasurer, our director of communication and research, who's been working at this for years and years, and because of our population that turns over, and people who are reticent to give their email and cell phone contact information, it's difficult. So while we have people in real time working at full capacity to develop the kinds of best practices, body language, and other great information, there's a disconnect with respect to people who many of whom are working at home, because we can't access them. Many of them we could access through employer-based email. Now we're struggling. We are, however, doing things about this, and in order to respond, we have engaged in a number of different conference calls with the local leaders, and I've begun to ramp up the role of our international vice presidents. So although their role has been historically kind of, I'm not going to say honorary, but it's they haven't been involved in the day-to-day function of how the international does this with respect to locals. They're now, I've asked them, and I'm now holding them accountable to get involved in this major capacity ramp up that we need during this time. Some of the other things that we've been doing, like other healthcare unions, I found myself on the phone yesterday with a supplier who purchases and distributes healthcare equipment. It's funny that I'd be talking to a guy that has a supply chain that goes as far as factories in China to be able to buy N95 masks for nurses. But that's where we are. The union is filling gaps that are created by lack of support and lack of preparation for other institutions. That the opportunities here, there have been more organizing leads. The union is now evaluating, what its needs will be in the future. And I can say that we had an idea to convene a futures committee before our convention. We made 16 changes structural to our constitution, but I don't think we went far enough. So we'll be convening our futures committee very soon to continue that change process. Our organizing, as I said, we've had more organizing leads since this started a month ago than in any time in recent history. And we've actually started campaigns through Zoom and through other technology. It's incredible that our organizers have been able to manage and move certain campaigns ahead. So we're working from home. We're doing what we can to provide people with best practices and model language, extend grievance procedures, and do what other unions are trying to do. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Rich, thank you so much. I know it's enormously challenging to try to fit in everything that you're doing in a brief 5-minute presentation. We'll have an opportunity for more discussion, but thank you so much. I just want to turn now to Lily Eskelsen Garcia from the NEA. And you've got 5 minutes as well, Lily, and we'll cut you off just like everybody else.
I knew as you were telling people a 5 minute, you were talking to me because I don't know how to do anything brief. I'm just going to just explode on everything. Wow. One of the things Jeff asked me to maybe put in the room is personal challenges. And I will tell you, I am always an emotional person. I have found myself on the point of tears more times in the last week or two. And you're supposed to be this hardcore union goon, don't mess with me. And you feel like you've got tears in your eyes half the time. And part of it, I know, is the uncertainty we're all living with. We're used to fights. We're used to who's the bad guy and we're going to be the good guys and we're going to go in there. But I will tell you, for me, the tears well up most of the time. I'll probably do it during this 5 minutes. I'm sorry, 4.5, Jeff. It comes from pride. It comes from this awesome pride. I see a couple of my colleagues, Shelley and Eric and Montserrat, people who have been teachers, people who know what it's like to love somebody else's kid. And I keep hearing from my affiliate leaders when I check in with them, they'll just they're not reporting anything. They're just saying something that touched them. In Vermont, an elementary school, all the teachers didn't have a chance to say goodbye to their kids when the school closed down. And so they all decided to get in the parking lot in their cars, not get out of their cars. And they called all of their kids and the parents, and they said, come out and wait on the sidewalk. We're coming by to say goodbye to you. And they did a caravan with balloons and horns honking and their lights flashing. And they waved at the kids and the kids waved back. And he was so proud of them. In Nebraska, the affiliate president there told me, you know, we're trying to do a lot of things online. We're trying to deliver lessons online. Some of my members called in the poorest communities in rural Nebraska, and they said, we don't have an internet. Our parents don't have a laptop or a tablet. What are we gonna do for those kids? And some of the teachers said, call the local PBS station, call the local news stations. Everybody has a TV and a $10 antenna. Some of these kids don't even have cable. And they got the local stations to donate like an hour, an hour, an hour, an hour. This is for the little kids. This is for middle school. This is for high school. And then our teachers volunteered. Every day they're going to put on a different activity, a lesson for those kids, sing a song with them, read them part of a story. And they're inundated with these folks who are saying, I've got an idea, I've got an idea. We are the most creative people on the planet. And oh my God, what the medical professionals are doing right now to make themselves those heroes. Nobody can touch that. But I like to think that our educators are keeping the home fires burning. We are back home. We are helping those parents who are going out of their minds. And the kids that are going to fall behind are the kids who live on the margins. And those are our first concerns. So I get to be incredibly proud, and I'm not the least bit embarrassed when I'm talking to a reporter telling them these stories. Go check this out. I'm giving them names of folks that are doing incredible things. And a lot of times with those reporters, I can hear their kids in the background, and they're going, really, can you help me? Can you give me some ideas? Everybody's appreciating a teacher these days. Let me end with this. And it's what I was saying in the smaller group. What we're dealing with is overwhelming, and we are not overwhelmed. We are doing the impossible. We are doing the unthinkable, and it is unthinkable more for our leaders, our union leaders, who could not think of doing a call like this. If I were to say, we are not getting people plane tickets, you are not going to all come in and have a 2-day meeting, they would have said, that's impossible. We can't do that. And now we're being forced to do the impossible, and we're getting work done. And
Lily, I just want to say, amazing, amazing, and you are doing the impossible. And thank you for sharing that. I know it's so hard to contain your energy and enthusiasm, but it's inspiring to all of us. And we'll have an opportunity for a little bit more talking, but thank you so much. Awesome. Let me say to everyone else, we have one more speaker. That's Erica Smiley from Jobs with Justice. She's going to speak for 5 minutes, and then we're going to work on managing and doing a little bit what Lily was saying, the impossible, which is let's see if we can manage a full group discussion with 65 people on Zoom. But let me turn it over to Smiley.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff, and thank you, Lily and Richard, John. These are some of my favorite people, and I'm really chuffed to be able to speak in the same panel as each of you. I am with Jobs with Justice, and so don't have direct members, but have seen many of your members in crisis and know that you all are doing the impossible, and that those crises are breeding some pretty amazing creativity, and really appreciate that. That said, I get to focus a little bit on reflections of thinking forward, because I think that this is a moment, like many have mentioned, that is an inflection point. It's a sea change. It's an opportunity to see things for what they are, and I think we have an opportunity to decide if we're going to represent, a small number of people, or if we're going to use this as an opportunity to explode the labor movement. And really appreciating some of the organizing that Richard and John were talking about, not just in spite of this pandemic, but almost because of it. There was a moment, my daughter she has something to say as well. She can't take away my 5 minutes. There was a moment in NLLI 2, I believe, when I think it was Joe Alvarez was talking to us a little bit about systems, and this idea that the system was created to produce this situation. And I've heard a lot of folks talk about how we weren't prepared and what mistakes were made and how is this happening to us in the US. And I keep going back to this understanding that actually we're in a moment where the system that was created exactly for this type of crisis. And the one example that I feel like, maybe most iterates of that resonates with I think all of us is this question of the masks. Like Richard was sharing, that we've had to provide the masks because it was inefficient for hospitals to keep such large numbers on site. That would have impacted their costs and their bottom line. So this is not just a failure of individuals, but it's a market failure. It's proof that the market isn't going to actually do the things that it claims it can do. It can't actually deal with problems of public health and social need. And so, I really appreciated some of the way that Fabricio talked about it in our small group, not to put him completely on blast, but I think that, this is a moment for us to think about what the new normal is, because I frankly don't want to get back to the old normal. It wasn't working for most of us, and would like to see this as an opportunity for us to pivot into making real structural demands and shifts. Where do our people, where do those teachers who did a parade to say goodbye to their students, where do they get to be in decision-making power around not only various stimulus packages, but also the implementation of future public health decisions and choices. And likewise, for those transit workers that John was talking about, where do they actually have access to decision-making? This is a moment where it's not enough just for our existing government, which has always wanted to be small, right, based on the current administration, for us to just ask them to bail out people, but actually an opportunity for us to say, this is actually what government is supposed to be, and this is who it's supposed to be, and these are the opportunities for us to govern ourselves. And so, I'm really excited about some of the proposals that are coming out, including from Elizabeth Warren and others, about including workers on corporate boards, as well as in different regulatory bodies that are supposed to be holding these various industries accountable and the stimulus that they've gotten. But I just want to note that this is a moment for us to really look forward, and not just to, despite the sadness and the difficulty that we're all facing, that this is actually a real moment for us to look forward and build the future and the labor movement in our own vision and our own values. I like to think about what the conversation was amongst labor leaders before the Great Depression, and how they were able to then leverage their own strength in terms of their organizing, as well as the moment to then create a framework that allowed and called a lot of people in to the movement, where people saw the labor movement as a voice for them amidst a lot of chaos. So, I want to close with that and to suggest that there's going to be, this is just the beginning of what will inevitably be a long process of figuring out the way forward, and there will be tensions. Like, there's going to be tons of polarities within it, between representing existing members versus welcoming new individuals who are getting activated through this moment. There'll be, tension in terms of what types of structural changes are worth doing, and how far is too far, and these types of questions. And I think that one thing that gives me a lot of hope is that NLLI, this space, is a place where we can productively hold those types of tensions and have those types of conversations in a way that is productive and not divisive, and in a way that helps us move forward collectively. So I'm grateful to be in relationship with all of you. And I'll, with my daughter taking my glasses, I will wrap up my comments there. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, Nika Rose. You were able to cut her off when we couldn't. Smiley, thank you. That was great. And John, Rich, Lily, and Smiley, thank you all for those really remarkably moving comments that you've shared. We have a little bit of time left, and we want to open it up for some discussion before we move towards concluding our program at 2. And the way that you can enter into this conversation is going into the chat room and then asking a question or a comment. You should direct it to everyone, and we will try to manage those the questions and comments as they come in. Or you can raise your hand. If you go into the participant list, you'll see a little icon that's a hand raised, and we can call on you that way. So we're all experimenting together with how we have these conversations. And you can direct a question or comment to any of the 4 speakers, John, Rich, Lily, or Smiley, or to the full group. So I see a hand up from John Butler. I'll call on John, and then I'm going to come back to John Samuelsen, who has a question or comment. So John Butler, if you unmute yourself and jump in.
I think I've succeeded in unmuting myself.
Yes.
Hi, folks. How are you doing? Has anyone heard anything about whether the expanded unemployment benefits might be problematic for people seeking adjustment in their immigration status due to the president's public charge order?
I'm going to suggest that we put that question into the community, and we'll circle back if there are some folks who have an answer to it, John. Thanks for raising it. John Samuelsen, I saw that you physically put your hand up. So I want to come back to you, and then I'll look for others who are raising their hands either in the participant group.
Quickly as I can, I try to put my hand up electronically. I don't think it was working. There are opportunities here, I think, for structural change, and I realize we all come from different industries, and in particular, our fight has been in the airline industry and in public transit. But we've been able to, the trade union movement, the unions have been able to accomplish things that we've been looking to accomplish for a long time, even though it's for all the wrong reasons. But in New York City right now, the bus system is rear door boarding and no fares. And we would really like to push this opportunity to have free public transit for all built into the tax base rather than fare box driven in America. It makes all the sense in the world. And somebody mentioned before about some of the changes that we're seeing becoming enshrined permanently as we go forward. And we would love to see free public transit on the national agenda in a way that some other issues, industry by industry, are now on the national agenda. And it's working, it's happening in New York City. It's demonstrating that the government can fund public transit. Just one other issue very quickly, the airline industry has a very strong propensity for kicking dirt in the face of workers constantly by declaring bankruptcy when they have billions of dollars of cash on hand. So we have those protections against that right now until the end of September. So it's my belief that there's a significantly good chance that the airline industry in general, each carrier, will declare bankruptcy and do their best to abrogate our contracts. So this is really a moment in time for the Democrats to continue to stand strong with working people in ways that actually surprised me a little bit, and make some structural changes in corporate America's ability to abrogate contracts through bankruptcy. So that's it for me.
Thanks, John. An important point for us to think about is the ways, like Lily was saying, we're doing things that are impossible, that there are things that were unimaginable or regarded as impossible 6 months ago that are suddenly on the agenda. Then how does that open up these opportunities going forward? I see that we have Tim McGuire from Canada. And if folks would introduce themselves, that would be helpful because not everybody knows everyone. Tim?
Hi, Tim McGuire from Toronto, Canada. I had two thoughts. One is, and I'm happy to see, I can't remember who said this, but there was a number of reports about, I think it was John actually, unions involved in the militancy, which I think now is mostly spontaneous. There was a video that went viral here in Toronto and probably throughout Canada almost a week ago of a construction worker, a senior construction worker, getting on a platform and saying he's had enough. He's not going home to his family and telling his wife that her parents might be susceptible to something he brings home. It wasn't the labor movement that got in there. He did it, and I think the Amazon was spontaneous. But I'm happy to see that there is some examples of unions getting involved in some of that militancy, because I think that's important. I think some unions, others in the public, are saying we got to support our leaders like Trudeau and our Premier Ford. They're doing a great job. Well, it's also a time for critical thought. And while I think some in the labor movement just were kind of muted in terms of being critical, at least some critical thought in terms of the packages that were being made available. Three unions, Unifor, which is not officially in the labor movement at the moment, but that's the former auto workers, UFCW and steel workers signed a letter with Jagmeet Singh, leader of the NDP, urging for more supports, financial supports for workers. And I think that's really important to do, to show the labor movement's engaged and involved. But I also want to make a point about an ally that signed that letter with them, the Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses. Staunch enemy of the labor movement. And I think that's an opportunity for unions to work with a potential new ally going forward. Maybe some.
Let me jump in. This is Jeff. I just want to make sure that other folks have an opportunity, but
sure.
But you've raised an interesting opportunity around.
I just wanted to say one more thing that I think this is a time to be specific about some of the demands for what labor standards and labor rights should look like going forward. My thesis, my advisor on my paper I'm working on, is the only Canadian in a Harvard project called Clean Slate. And if you want a clean slate, what are those demands, and what can you do for militancy, new militancy, to achieve those goals?
Thank you, Tim. And I think Joe Alvarez, who's one of our founding members of this program, had a comment that he wanted to share.
Well, I just shared it on chat. I don't need to say anything more about it. It's clear that we're not going to be in the same world past the pandemic, and so as we're responding today to what's happening, how are we kind of creating, the possibilities? What several speakers have said, that what John was saying, how the Samuelsen was saying about how what's unimaginable, we can keep adding to the list of all the unimaginable things that are already happening: paid family leave, guaranteed pay during an economic crisis, on and on and on. And it's really how are we responding to the moment, and responding in a way that we're looking for how are we making transformational change.
Great, thank you, Joe. And Lisa Bastian from Canada.
I'm certainly thinking about how this translates into a new world moving forward, but also how we can mobilize our collective power for what's happening right now. Like, there seems to be a real shortage of personal protective equipment on our frontline workers. And it shouldn't be just those workers who have to fight for their rights because of the situation that they're in. Many of them will feel like, I'm not going to make noise about personal protective equipment because it's my duty and my job to, as a frontline worker, to, just attend to our patients. And because their attention's on their patients, all of our attention should be on making sure that they have the equipment that they need. And I was really inspired by the example of the GE workers who basically said, we'll take it upon ourselves and we'll stop working unless you start making ventilators. Like, airplane engines are not needed right now. No one's flying anywhere. So this is going to be a complete halt until you, react to the needs of the entire world globally right now. So, how can we mobilize our collective power to ensure there should be no shortages of N95 masks anywhere. All frontline workers should have, abundance of supply or whatever they need to be safe. So certainly thinking forward about what the new world looks like, but how can we mobilize ourselves right now around that issue?
Thank you, Lisa. So we're coming to the conclusion of this discussion, but I want to just give, Rich had to jump off the line, but if Lily or John or Smiley want to, like literally 30 seconds, like just a closing thought before we tie this up, and I'm going to then turn it back over to Kathleen. Lily, do you want to, anything else you want to say briefly? I know there's a lot you want to say, but anything in 30 seconds.
Again, I'm noticing the briefly here. Just that this is our time. This is our time. You know that we've had these Red for Ed marches in the street, and we think about our union work as big groups of people. We're just going to do it differently. We're finding ways to inspire and organize and communicate, and we're doing the impossible, and we're going to be better and stronger because of it. This is big government can do big things. Big government can be your local school district, making sure kids have what they need. And everything else that folks on this call represent, we're going to do it.
Thank you, Lily. John.
Keep fighting the boss.
Okay, there you did it in 10 seconds, my man. That's New York. And Smiley.
That's really hard to compete with. Yeah, I think this is a moment when you've got people like Cuomo calling for nationalization of plants and Britney Spears calling for the redistribution of wealth. Then it's really important for the labor movement to be out front in terms of projecting the future needs of workers. So this is a moment for us to step into, not step away from. Thanks, guys. Love the space.
Thank you, Smiley. And thank you all, Lily, John, Smiley, and Rich, for your opening comments and all of the thoughtful conversation here. I just want to conclude by saying, very briefly and kind of picking up a little bit on the themes that have come up, including Joe's comments, that this is a crisis and every crisis poses grave perils and great possibilities. And I think the challenge before us as a community and as a movement is to deal with the immediate threats that confront us in this moment, and at the same time block the designs of our adversaries who, in Naomi Klein's orientation around the shock doctrine, are prepared to drive us in precisely the wrong direction and take full advantage of this crisis for their own interests. And the critical question is, are we prepared to step into this space to be able to take advantage of these moments of opportunity where things that were unthinkable are suddenly imaginable, things that were impossible seem quite probable, and we can make that happen if we come together as a community, and this is a space for us to explore how to do that. Thank you all so much. Amazing discipline on the part of the speakers. Mm-hmm. And let me turn it back over to my friend and comrade, Kathleen.
Thanks, everybody. I want to have a special thank you to the speakers for sharing your wisdom and insight, but really actually to thank all of you. I have been in a couple of conversations like this with different communities that are trying to process what's happening, and every single time I just walk away with such a sense of what a privilege it is to be in the labor movement and to be in the movement that you are all leading in, and just feel so grateful for the work you're doing and for how you share back the wisdom and insights from that. And as Jeff was saying, and John, when you say always fight the boss, it's we know that corporate power and corporate greed are always looking for ways to take power away from working people. And that has to be our North Star right now, is that how do we keep working people in the frame, and that our worth is not defined by whether we make someone else rich or not, but actually by our inherent worth. And I think this crisis is calling many people to see public employees in particular in a new way and to understand their inherent worth. And hopefully that's something that we can draw on and message to build more support for working people more generally. I wanted to say a few final closing comments. I know some folks are going to drop off. So first of all, we want your feedback on what else you would want from this community to support your work. And so this afternoon, you're going to get an email from us with a follow-up survey that is literally 8 questions, and the survey tool estimate says 2 minutes to fill it out. So if you would please take time to fill that out, that's for us to know, do you want to do more of these kind of meetings? Or if not, what other kinds of support and how else would you want to access this community to help it continue to guide us to figure out what's the transformative vision, not only the reactive vision, although we have to have that as well. And I want to just say 2 last things. One is I can't think of a time when vision is more important. And that, of course, we have to show up for every person that's on the front lines and for every member and every worker, member or not, who doesn't have an income or who is losing their health care or who is homeless. Like, of course, we have to do all that. And we also have to be looking ahead to what is the transformative potential, like the new dialogue around people needing health insurance, that has to be a fundamental right. And not only because people have earned it, but actually because it's what keeps us all safe. And there's such transformative power in what's happening right now in terms of how people are talking about the value of working people. So how do we build on that? And how are we coming back to the question of vision that we all worked on in the first week of the NLLI to keep infusing our vision based on the new reality we live in? And the second thing I'm really thinking about is that, you know, in the most like fundamental sense to me, how we get through this has everything to do with the power of the relationships in the community we're building. And so that is one of the reasons I think the NLLI community is so critical right now, because the depth of our community, that's where we're going to have the most access to resources. And I don't just mean money, I mean the intellectual and the emotional resources that everyone is bringing to this fight. So I want to thank you for that. And lastly, just to put in a little bit of a plug, we are still planning to do the next year of the NLLI starting in November. That will be our 8th year. We are recruiting people. We're looking for your recommendations and your advice about who we should be bringing into that community, and really to be thinking about who else do you wish could be on this call with us to help us guide our own thinking and our own response. So we'll be reaching out to you, but also don't wait for us. If you have ideas, we really want to hear from you. Thank you so much. I want to thank our team and Allison, who managed all the tech, and Alicia from the Solidarity Center. And thank you guys. And let's continue to be in connection as we work through what's happening in the coming months. Thanks, everybody.